What we have here is what the owner says is a 76 Marshall 1959 Mark II, which has been poorly converted to a 2203. Now, I will verify all this as we go. I have not seen inside the amp more than a cursory glance. We're going to discover this together. The inspection tag down at the other end of the chassis, all the pencil writing on it has long ago faded, so I'll have to look at date codes of pots and things, but so far everything checks out for 76. 76 is when they went from the round plastic toggles to these rockers. Got some pretty good chewed up damage on this panel here. I will try to fix this in this process. It has the original dailies. They are all getting changed out. Knobs look original, including what always happens. If you have a Marshall and that little metal cap falls off, it was just super glued on in the first place. So you can fix that if you don't lose it. Converted from 4-hole to 2-hole for the 2203. Sorry about the camera shake there. I'll be undoing that. There's the inspection with the dates all faded. Going to the rear panel, got some duct tape residue. I'll try to gently remove that. It's always tricky with these Marshall metal panels. The silk screen wants to come off. But I'll do a very small test area just to see if I can find a solvent that will get this off without getting this off. It's a process of discovery. The amp was shipped without tubes, per my request. Another old sticker residue here. Again, I will see if that's possible. That one's more likely because there's no silk screening adjacent, so I can get that off without removing ink. Output jacks have these metal nuts. I'm not sure if those are original. I don't think so. I don't like using metal nuts on a plastic jack, so I will return these speaker jacks with the amp in case they are original. Marshall was making so many changes about 76, 77 that I am not a historian of all the little things like this. I know the circuits really well, but if they were using these metal nuts on these plastic jacks at that time, that was a bad idea. It'll just shear through that plastic. So these will get replaced. More duct tape residue to remove. The impedance selector switch has been replaced with this thing, which is not the most elegant. I'll look and see if there's anything I can do that's prettier, but first time I'll look inside. If that switch is a good quality switch, maybe I'll just give it a larger, prettier knob to more disguise this big ugly steel washer a little bit better. The main selector switch has been plugged, which is good. It's hardwired to 117, or so it says. I'll verify that. There's an IEC cable connector here, which is a good fit if it's non-original. I've had 76 through 79 Marshalls in, and most of those had the Bulgin connector, not an IEC, so maybe someone got lucky. This hardware does not match, and this is more proper for this plug than this, but I'll probably replace both these with something that I know is good and will match. Mains fuse, HT fuse. Looks like the HT fuse has been replaced in terms of the holder. I'll make sure that they're good quality, and I'll make sure they have the correct fuses in there. But that's down the way. Let's look here. These output tube sockets aren't in the prettiest condition. I'm going to have to go in there with a meter and verify there is no conductive path due to heat. Sorry, wasn't looking through the lens as I said that, so the camera might have gone out of focus or looked in the wrong place. There are also these little chips out, which may or may not affect performance. So we'll get to that. And the chassis got a nice layer of dirt and rust. We'll clean that up a good bit. I need to, when I'm changing these tubes, these filter caps later, because I need to make sure that all the grounding surfaces are good. Underneath the tube covers for the preamp, surprisingly hard to do one-handed. This one's got a nice bend to it. Yeah, that whole socket is kind of loose. These old sockets are just riveted to the chassis on these. And so you can have that where the metal just kind of starts to shear. I will test them and see how they do. These tend to go microphonic over the years, especially that riveted connection. When necessary, I will drill out the rivets and replace with new belt and sockets screwed to the chassis. But I try to avoid doing that. Original is always the goal when original does not keep you from having a good sound. So as long as they work and they're quiet, they can stay. If there's an issue with any of these, bye-bye. I'll return them if the owner ever sells to some collector who wants all the original stuff. But the magic of a good sounding Marshall is not the tube sockets, as long as it does have good quality tube sockets. The iron is all original. I am not as conversant with the date codes on Marshall iron as I am on Fender, but I'll research that. But it all looks original to me. Let's look inside this thing. Okay, remember a minute ago when I said I was not a Marshall parts historian? I know the circuits. Turns out I was wrong. This looks like this might be the original fuse holder, and this would be the replacement, because this one's got some fugly work, and this is either original or someone who knew what they're doing did this. Now, I don't know why this ground splice would be here. I don't know why this splice would be here. The power transformer looks, at least from the outside, to be original to the amp. So I'm going to have to look into that. Maybe there was a fire that burned some of these wires and they just snipped off the burned end of the wires and soldered to the existing secondaries. All this stuff here is going to have to go away and be redone properly, because that's just hideous. These filter caps are going to get changed. What the hell? Why would someone... That's a terrible solder joint there. But why would someone go in here, you know, if you're working in this area and you slip and you hit the chassis with your screwdriver and make a little nick like this, that's bad enough, but then to keep going at it like a demented Woody Woodpecker. So I'm not sure what's up with that. That's a shame, but it won't affect the sound of the amp. It's got some non-original grid stopper resistors on the output tubes, these metal films. There is that impedance selector switch. Let me get this to focus better. And that does not, to my eye, look like a good quality impedance selector switch. So this is going to get redone properly. Something that can really handle the current. I will try to reuse these voltage balance resistors here on the screen nodes. If they're still good, they'll go back in. Let's look at the preamp stuff in terms of the socket area, and then we'll get to the other stuff in the amp. I'll make sure this is focusing. So this stuff, at the preamp sockets at least, looks pretty much unmolested. Let's look at the pots. Let's look at the pots. So this presence pot has been redone, and fairly poorly. Probably works okay, but doesn't look right. Doesn't look right at all. Again, crappy solder work, non-original. Some non-original pots done poorly. So these pots are not original to the amp, I don't believe. I really don't think so. And I don't think this is either. This might be, but it looks more like something from a different brand. So I think all this is going to need to be redone properly. When I do the video showing the new pots in this area and how everything is wired, I'll be putting a reference to this bit that you're seeing right now for comparison. But this is utter shit. And you can say goodbye to this ground bus wire across the backs of the pots. We'll get to that later in the process. I'm going to do a couple of videos on grounding that people have asked for. And this amp will be one of the example amps for that grounding concept. Yeah, needs new input jacks, all new pots. Oh my God. Let's get into everything that's wrong with the butchered preamp. We'll start with this missing nut and tooth washer. When you're working on a 76 Marshall, and you take one of these out, you put it in a little bowl or a little cup or a little box or something, and you don't lose them. And you put them back. And if you do lose one, you get a replacement. I think it's an M3, and you put it on there. It might be an M4. You don't want this thing moving. Movement is not your friend with a higher gain circuit. A lot of tack soldered stuff. Resistors changed. I can barely imagine a scenario in which case all these original pyres would have failed. So I don't know why they're in here, these replacements. There's nothing wrong with these half watt or 1 watt carbon films. It's just that there probably was nothing wrong with the pyres that were in there to begin with. Some real fugly stuff. Let me get it to focus. There's just no reason for things to be that ugly. It's not going to be secure either. Those are, when something looks ugly, it works ugly. Someone is chasing Eddie Van Halen here. Good luck with that, guys. I know people who've played his amp, and they sounded like themselves through his amp. And I know people whose amp Van Halen played through, and he sounded like himself. Now, I'll do a separate video on tone is in the hands versus what the amplifier does, because, you think if I say that would negatively affect what I do. If it's in the hands, why bother having a guy like me go through your amp? Well, the truth is, it's both. And the short version is, the more the amplifier allows the guitarist to achieve in the physical world what they hear in their head, the less of an obstacle that box on the stage is to their creativity. The more time they spend thinking about what they're going to play, or what little rhythmic change the drummer did, or what the girl in the third row did, or what the guy in the fifth row did. Looks like, whatever you want to think about. You don't have to think about that big black box on stage behind you, and whether you should adjust the treble, or whether you should turn down the mids, or what, if you're thinking about the process, you're not creating. A really good amplifier makes you forget about the amplifier, and you can just create. Beyond that, if young Edward Van Halen had gone to the shop and bought a Vox instead of that Marshall, his playing style would have developed differently. Conversely, if Brian May had walked into his guitar shop and bought Eddie Van Halen's Marshall instead of the AC30 that he got, his playing style would have been different. So, while tone is in the hands, it's more complicated than that. Oh, good Lord. All right, let's see here. Besides getting all this nonsense bad solder out and getting all the flux off the top of the board, these diodes don't last very well. They're not reliable. So some new diodes here in the bridge rectifier and the bias. These two bias caps are going to get replaced. This one already is a replacement. So is this. So they were replaced at different times. Tack soldered resistor in the bias supply does not make me feel confident. So everything which is non-original is going to be looked at very closely, and I may use a different component there. And I'll be checking out the different values to see where everything's at, where it should be. I've not typically been a fan of ceramic disc caps in the output section of Marshalls. Neither should there be a physically huge cap forced into the lead spacing on a PCB and then tack soldered because it doesn't fit in the spacing on the PCB. So a lot of these caps are going away. All these tack soldered bits are going to be examined. Is this something where someone attached something across this cap and just left the solder? Or did they break the lead of the resistor? Sorry, I said cap. Did they put it like a capacitor across this resistor? Or did they break the lead and then use solder to glue it back together? I've got to find all these things out. And as fugly as the top of this board looks, I fear for what I'll find underneath. Even fairly good, well-intentioned techs can slightly damage the traces and pads on the bottom of these Marshall boards. Just a moment of inattention and something can go wrong. And if this is the work that this guy is willing to show the world, what horrors wait beneath? Stay tuned, we'll find out together. It'll be fun, gang. We can put on the show right here.